Every house that loses power goes through the same sequence. Flashlights come out first, then phones, then candles if someone can find them. Then the family sits together in one room, usually the living room, and waits. Waits for the power company, waits for news, waits for something to change. And while they sit there, in the dark, they are surrounded by working systems. Exposed pipes overhead, a water heater full of clean water 10 feet away. A car battery in the garage, with enough charge to run a light for a week. A chimney that moves air without a single watt of electricity. They don't see any of it, not because they're careless, because nobody ever pointed at a water heater and said, "That's 40 gallons of emergency drinking water." You just never looked at it that way. That's what this video is about. 7 systems built into almost every house. Systems that work without power, without fuel, without anything you have to buy. And to show you all 7, there's one story worth telling. Not a hypothetical, not a scenario. A real house, a real man, and 11 days in the dark. February 14th, 2021. Cedar Park, Texas, just north of Austin. The temperature dropped to 4 degrees Fahrenheit overnight. For a state where 35 degrees is considered a hard freeze, 4 degrees was another planet. The grid failed within hours. Not a neighborhood outage, not a rolling blackout, but a statewide cascade. ERCOT, the agency that manages the Texas grid, ordered load shedding to prevent a total collapse. 4.5 million homes went dark. And they stayed dark. Not for a day, not for 3 days. For some households, 11 days. No heat, no light, no running water, because the water treatment plants lost power too. No way to cook for families with electric stoves and induction cooktops. Pipes froze and burst inside walls. The sound of water spraying into drywall at 3 in the morning. And nothing you can do about it, because there's no valve you can reach, and no plumber answering the phone. People were melting snow in bathtubs. Grocery stores closed because their own refrigeration was gone, and the highways were impassable for delivery trucks. It was the kind of event that people in the survival space talk about in theory. In Cedar Park, it wasn't theory. It was Tuesday morning, and the forecast said 6 more days of the same. Ray Valdez was 63 years old that February. Retired plumber. 31 years installing, repairing, and replacing water systems in residential and commercial buildings across central Texas. He and his wife lived in a single-story ranch house built in 1987. Slab foundation, brick veneer, attached 2-car garage, gas furnace, gas water heater, gas stove. A normal house, not a bunker, not prepped. A house. When the power went out on the 14th, Ray didn't panic. He didn't go looking for flashlights. He went to the garage and disconnected his car battery. That's where the story gets interesting. Because over the next 11 days, Ray Valdez used 7 systems that were already inside his house. Systems that every house has. And he and his wife never ran out of water. Never went cold past discomfort. Never lost the ability to cook. And never needed a single piece of gear they didn't already own. He didn't survive because he was prepared. He survived because he understood what a house actually is. And what a house actually is, when you strip away the electricity, is a machine. A slow, passive, gravity-fed, thermally buffered machine with more capability than anyone gives it credit for. Here's what he found. Or more accurately, here's what he already knew was there. The water heater. Every house with a tank-style water heater has between 40 and 80 gallons of potable water sitting in the basement or utility closet right now. Not stored for emergency, just sitting there, hot, pressurized, connected to the municipal supply. When the power goes out, and the city water stops flowing, which it did across most of Texas, that tank doesn't drain. It's sealed. The water inside is still clean, still drinkable, still there. All you have to do is open the drain valve at the bottom. That's a brass or plastic spigot, usually about 3 inches off the floor, connected to a garden hose thread. Ray attached a short hose, opened the valve, and filled a pot. 40 gallons. For 2 people drinking and cooking conservatively, that's about 8 to 10 days of water, without buying a single gallon. There's a catch. The first gallon or 2 out of that valve will look like weak tea. Sediment. Calcium deposits, rust flakes, whatever's been settling at the bottom of the tank for years. It looks terrible. It's not dangerous, but it needs to settle or strain through a cloth before you drink it. After the first 2 gallons, the water runs clear. Ray knew this because he'd drained hundreds of water heaters professionally. He also knew something else. Once you drain the tank, you can refill it with collected rainwater or snow melt, and the gas burner will heat it. If your gas line is still pressurized, which in most ice storms it is, the electrical grid and the gas grid are separate systems. When one fails, the other usually holds. Ray's gas never went out. His water heater became a purification system. Pour questionable water in the top, heat it to 140 degrees for 30 minutes. Drain clean water from the bottom. That's not a survival hack. That's plumbing. The chimney. The Valdez house had a fireplace with a masonry chimney. They hadn't used it in years. A gas insert sat in the firebox, and the damper was closed. Ray opened the damper on day 1, not to build a fire, to breathe. When a house is sealed up against cold, windows shut, doors shut, towels stuffed under gaps, it becomes an airtight box. A gas stove running for heat produces carbon monoxide, even small amounts. The standard advice is to never use a gas stove for heating. The real advice is that if you have no other option and you open the chimney damper, you now have a passive exhaust system. Warm air rises, carbon monoxide rises. The chimney draws contaminated air up and out, and fresh air seeps in through the small gaps around windows and doors to replace it. It's not perfect ventilation. It's not an engineered HVAC system, but it's the difference between headaches on day 2 and unconsciousness on day 4. Ray cracked the damper 6 inches, positioned the stove burner on low, and monitored his wife for symptoms. 11 days, no incident. The chimney did what chimneys do, moved air without a single watt. The car battery. This was the first thing Ray grabbed, and it tells you how his mind worked. A standard car battery, 12 volts, 500 to 700 cold cranking amps. Sitting in the garage, in a 2,000-pound machine that wasn't going anywhere because the roads were sheets of ice. Ray disconnected it, carried it inside, and set it on a towel on the kitchen counter. With a simple 12-volt adapter, the kind that plugs into a car cigarette lighter socket, $7 at any auto parts store, he charged their phones. Both of them. For 11 days. A car battery at full charge holds roughly 60 amp hours. A phone charger draws about 2 amps. That's 30 full phone charges from one battery. Even accounting for conversion loss and the battery not being perfectly full, that's 2 phones charged daily for 2 weeks. He also connected a small 12-volt LED strip, the kind people use under kitchen cabinets, and ran it along the hallway ceiling. 3 watts. Barely visible in daylight. At night, it turned the hallway into the only lit corridor on the block. Neighbors started coming to Ray's house on day 3, not for water, for light. Light is a psychological anchor, and people will walk through ice to reach it. And here's the detail that matters. Ray didn't drain the battery to 0. He knew that a lead-acid battery damaged by deep discharge might never recover. He kept it above 50%. And on day 5, when the roads were passable enough to idle the car in the driveway for 20 minutes, he put the battery back, ran the engine, recharged it, and brought it back inside. A 20-minute engine cycle every 4 to 5 days kept the battery alive for the entire outage. That's not a generator, but it's not nothing. The slope. Ray's lot, like most in Cedar Park, was graded to drain water away from the foundation. Standard construction. A slight pitch, maybe 2% grade, from the back of the house toward the street. When snow began melting on day 6, that slope became a water collection system. Ray placed a tarp across the low end of his backyard, pinned the edges with bricks, and let gravity do the work. Meltwater rolled downhill, hit the tarp, and pooled in the center crease. He scooped it into 5-gallon buckets and poured it into the water heater for heating and purification. The slope wasn't designed for this. It was designed to keep the foundation dry. But a grade is a grade. Water doesn't care why it was built. It just flows downhill. Over 5 days of intermittent melting, Ray collected roughly 35 gallons from a tarp the size of a dining table. That's not a well. But added to the water heater's original 40 gallons, it extended their supply from 10 days to nearly 3 weeks. Thermal mass. The Valdez house was built on a concrete slab with brick veneer exterior walls. Concrete and brick are dense materials. Dense materials absorb heat slowly and release heat slowly. This is thermal mass, the tendency of heavy materials to resist temperature change. When the house was heated to 68 degrees by the furnace before the outage, that heat didn't vanish when the power died. The slab, the walls, the brick, all of it had absorbed thermal energy over days of normal heating. It released that energy slowly into the interior air. On night 1, with the heat off, the house dropped to 55 degrees. Uncomfortable, not dangerous. By night 3, it had dropped to 45, still above freezing. The pipes in the interior walls, surrounded by that thermal mass, stayed above 32 degrees for 6 days. The pipes that burst across Texas were in exterior walls and attics, exposed to outside air without buffering. Ray's interior pipes never froze because the house itself was a thermal battery that nobody charged on purpose. He improved it. He hung blankets over every window, not for privacy, but for insulation. A blanket over a single-pane window reduces heat loss through that window by roughly 40%. Windows are the weakest thermal link in any house. They account for about 25 to 30% of total heat loss in a typical home, even though they make up less than 15% of the wall surface. Covering them is the single highest impact move you can make with materials already in your house. Blankets, towels, sleeping bags, even cardboard, anything that adds a dead air layer between the glass and the room. Ray closed every door except the kitchen and living room, shrinking the heated volume by 2/3. This is the same principle used in old farmhouses during harsh winters. You don't heat the house, you heat the room you're living in. Less volume, less heat loss, less fuel needed. And he kept the gas stove running on low, 1 burner, minimum flame, adding just enough BTUs to slow the thermal bleed. The house didn't stay warm. It stayed above freezing for 11 days. A concrete slab, 4 brick walls, some blankets over windows, and 1 gas burner. That's thermal engineering done by a plumber who never took a thermodynamics class. His neighbor 3 doors down had the same house, same construction, same slab, and burst pipes on day 4. The difference wasn't the house. It was what each man understood about the house. The attic. This one is counterintuitive. Ray opened his attic hatch on day 3, in winter, with the house already cold. His wife thought he'd lost his mind. But here's what he understood. The attic had passive ventilation, soffit vents along the eaves, and a ridge vent at the peak. When the stove was running, warm air in the house rose through the ceiling, through the attic hatch, into the attic, and out through the ridge vent. Fresh cold air entered through the soffits. This created a slow but continuous air exchange, the same principle as the chimney, but for the entire house instead of one room. Ray cracked the hatch 2 inches, enough for airflow, not enough to dump the heated air mass. The result, carbon monoxide levels stayed negligible throughout the house, not just near the fireplace. The attic became a whole house ventilation system, powered by the temperature differential between inside and outside. The colder it was outside, the stronger the draft. The system worked better in extreme cold than it would have in mild weather. Physics doing exactly what physics does. The gas line. The last system and the one that tied everything together. Ray's house had gas service, furnace, water heater, stove, dryer. When the electrical grid went down, the furnace stopped working because its blower requires electricity. The dryer stopped for the same reason. But the stove was a simple ignition system. Turn the knob, and gas flows to the burner. In newer stoves, the igniter is electric. You turn the knob and hear clicking. No power, no click, no flame. But you can still light the burner with a match. The gas still flows. In Ray's 87-era stove, it was even simpler. A standing pilot light. Click, gas, flame. No electricity required at any point in the chain. He cooked every meal for 11 days on that stove. He heated water on it. He ran a low burner for supplemental warmth. The gas line was pressurized the entire time because gas distribution infrastructure in Texas was winterized decades ago, even when the electrical grid wasn't. 2 separate systems, 2 separate failure modes. When one failed, the other held. That separation is invisible during normal life. You flip a switch, the furnace runs. Gas and electricity work together, and you never think about which is which. The moment the grid fails, that separation becomes the most important fact about your house. Ray ate hot food on day 11. His neighbor, with an all-electric kitchen, induction cooktop, electric water heater, heat pump, ate cold canned beans on day 2, couldn't heat water to wash dishes, and went to a shelter on day 4. Same street, same storm, different fuel architecture. 11 days, one house, one man who understood what he was living inside. No generator, no solar panel, no survival kit, no bug-out bag. 7 systems, all of them built in before he moved in, all of them invisible until you know what to look for. Here's the thing about Ray Valdez. He didn't discover anything. He didn't invent a technique. He simply looked at a house the way he'd looked at houses for 31 years, as a collection of systems, each with a function, each with a capacity, each with a failure mode and a use mode. The water heater wasn't a water heater to him. It was a pressurized storage vessel, with a heat source and a drain. The chimney wasn't decorative. It was a convection column. The car battery wasn't part of the car. It was a portable power cell. Every object had a second name, the engineering name, and that name told him what it could do when the first name stopped mattering. That's not genius. That's just looking at things the way they are, instead of the way they're labeled. Your house has the same 7 systems. The water heater. The chimney or exhaust flue. The car battery in the garage. The slope of your lot. The thermal mass of your walls and foundation. The passive ventilation in your attic or roof. And whatever fuel line, gas, propane, runs to your stove or furnace, independent of the electrical grid. Some houses have 6, some have 5. Apartments are different, fewer systems, but different ones. A high-rise apartment has thermal mass in the concrete floors above and below you, shared walls that buffer temperature, and a stairwell that functions as a convection chimney. A ground-floor unit has direct earth contact, the same thermal anchoring that kept Ray's slab above freezing. The point isn't the number. The point is that you are living inside a machine that has capabilities you've never mapped. And mapping it takes an afternoon. Open the water heater closet. Find the drain valve. Walk the slope of your yard. Check whether your stove lights without power. Look at the attic hatch. These aren't survival preparations. This is just knowing what you own. Yesterday we killed the bug-out bag. Today, why you probably don't need to leave. The house you're sitting in right now has more than you think. But there's one system Ray couldn't engineer. The one sleeping at the foot of his bed. 60 pounds of fur, teeth, and an appetite for 1,500 calories a day. His German Shepherd heard the neighbors coming 3 minutes before they knocked. Every time. For 11 days. The best perimeter alarm on the street, and the most expensive mouth in the house. That's tomorrow. Your house has systems, but what about the animal living inside it?